Welcome to Formula One and Sun. I'm Tom.
And I'm Oscar.
Well, Oscar, Suzuka, the Japanese Grand Prix. We see Mercedes wrap up the World Constructors' Championship this weekend.
Woohoo, that was so tight.
But it wasn't as simple as all that. The weekend was, what shall we call it, a disrupted one due to the typhoon.
Super typhoon.
It was a super typhoon in the area. That meant that Saturday running was cancelled, P3, and of course qualifying, which was held on Sunday morning, the day of the race, and we saw P1 and P2 on the Friday.
Which was good, because that gave us something to watch on Saturday, which is weird. But since the qualifying was on Sunday, we got to watch something on Saturday.
Yeah, we could watch qualifying on
And
Saturday night, US time, and then watch the race recorded on Sunday morning. It was an interesting weekend. We saw in P1, P2 kind of Mercedes dominant. As usual? Kind of as usual.
Well,
Ferrari have obviously had a resurgence in the second half of the season. Some good upgrades. That straight line pace is indomitable.
Weren't doing really well in the practices, though. They were fine.
They were okay, but it certainly looked like it was Mercedes to take to qualifying and get pole position. And in fact, we saw Bottas leading the way for the Mercedes duo, which was great to see.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Red Bulls were kind of there or thereabouts in P2 at least. Verstappen was pretty close to the Mercedes with the Ferraris just behind, and then, of course, Albon.
And sort of in the midfield, the Renaults were nowhere.
Yeah, it looked like the Renaults were a bit nowhere. McLaren looking pretty pacey. Toro Rosso kind of looking pretty pacey.
Well,
but of course,
Toro Rosso's a bit interesting. P1, they were looking absolute trash, but in P2, they really improved, actually.
Yeah, that's right. And then we saw, of course, no P3 running, and we get to qualifying on Saturday morning. And it's going to be an interesting qualifying, isn't it? Because they haven't had P3. They'd done some of the quali sims in P2.
Yeah.
Your earlier comment about Renault, there was some commentary after the practice sessions. They never got a clean quali run in through P2.
Which just sounds like a load of excuses to me.
Well, it certainly looked that way as we hit qualifying because, of course, the qualifying starts and some early surprises crash straight away, right?
Like Kubica, just straight into the wall through last corner.
So
and we see other people do that, but we'll get to
that. We did see other people. Well, we saw one other person do it.
Magnussen.
Yeah, and both pretty early on in the session. Kubica came out of the last chicane right
Just
at the end there.
Lost it.
Yeah, and you've got
he
the
just oversteered a lot.
Understeered, I think. So it comes out of last chicane where you kind of go through slowly to set up the entrance into the final turn onto the straight to get a good run.
It's sort of a tricky complex, that section. It's
that last complex, it is tricky, but not when you're just doing a setup for a run.
No, it shouldn't be.
Yeah, but of course, the track's pretty green, right? Because typhoon on Saturday.
Well,
so lots of rain. They hadn't run. They'd done qualifying, of course, on Sunday morning, but they come out and it's a little bit green. And Kubica just understeers straight off the track, and effectively just hits the barrier and it takes off the side of his car.
And then soon later, and I mean extremely soon later, Magnussen has a sort of weird thing. I think he spins in the middle of that last complex.
That's right. He took a lot of the outside of the curb as he kind of came out of the chicane.
And he kind of spins and his back sort of hits, not hard, I guess, because he just kept going afterwards.
Yep.
His back sort of hits and then turns around his front. I think that's just a
and he kind of when they cut
reverse tank slapper.
Yeah, almost a reverse tank slapper. Yeah, it looked like he oversteered as he came into that final corner, and as you say, kind of tried to save it, let off the brakes to try and steer, and in fact, probably by letting off the brakes, crashed into the wall. Might have been able to slow down a bit more.
And then he just started limping back into the pit lane as well.
Yeah, with their wing hanging off the back end, and of course that was all she wrote about the qualifying there. Probably the surprise then, though, no surprise George Russell didn't make it through. But the surprise really came in the shape of Ricciardo and Perez not making it through Q1.
Especially since the Racing Points hadn't been looking that bad the whole weekend.
No, the Racing Points look to have, and they have in the last couple of races, haven't they, really starting to show a bit of speed. I think Checo was making some claims about having the fourth fastest car. Bit bold, but certainly they've taken a step. Perez out, but the big surprise is Danny Rick, right? And Hulkenberg pushed him out. Hulkenberg just got through.
It's not a big surprise because
Why
they
not?
hadn't been looking that fast the whole weekend.
I guess I was trying to convince myself that they hadn't been looking fast because they'd done their quali runs early in P2 when the track was still evolving. They didn't get a clean quali run late in P2. So I guess I was thinking, no, they've got the pace. It's just they haven't had a good run yet. But then, when quali started, the Renaults were tail enders at best. What we learned later on, though, is this is post
that they both
race.
had problems, right?
Yeah, that's right. I can't remember. Hulkenberg's problem, I want to say, was electric somehow. And Ricciardo's rear suspension. And he said the car didn't feel right at all. And they sorted it out, obviously, for the race. There was some issue.
If that was Grosjean or Magnussen, they would have been whining on it on the radio a lot. But they didn't really say anything about it on the radio,
at the time, they just knew it was odd. And I think that after quali, they checked the car and found something amiss. And obviously something that was safety related because they'd be in Parc Ferme and they wouldn't be able to touch the car if it was a setup issue. Ricciardo ducks out of Q1 and we get into Q2 and we start to lose the kind of usual suspects, I guess.
And Hulkenberg, obviously.
Hulkenberg would just squeak through. Although Gasly had a really good Q2, makes it through to Q3, but we lose Giovinazzi.
Kind of interestingly, now that I see it now, Hulkenberg's Q1 time was faster than his Q2 time.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Maybe speaks to that issue we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Kvyat, a bit disappointing because Gasly's, you got to say, really been performing since going back to Toro Rosso. Having a cracker of qualities and races.
Although Sainz did get him in the Drivers' Championship this race, which is something that I meant to tell you. I didn't tell you.
Oh, is that confirmed?
But
like
even
he's
though
far
he
enough
was in
ahead.
Red Bull, Sainz has now got ahead of Gasly.
I got ahead of him.
Yeah.
But obviously he didn't score a whole lot of points. And Sainz, we'll talk about, has been doing really well. Stroll, of course, gets knocked out, which was a bit disappointing, actually. He'd been looking pretty fast. And Giovinazzi outqualifies Raikkonen, continuing Raikkonen's streak of pretty bad performances.
Well, he's just getting old, I think.
No, he does turn 40 next week, apparently. He's had a bit of a tough start to the, tough back half of the season so far. So we get into Q3, and of course, what's looking pretty spicy now is, and I think we saw this through... Well, not so much through Q2. I think the Mercedes was still faster through Q2. But we get into Q3, and our old mate Sebastian Vettel on fire.
Yeah.
Just on fire, wasn't he?
He keeps setting really fast times.
Yeah. And was it his
again.
second run was a bit faster than his first run? But even his first run was good enough for pole, I think. And he was a good 2/10 up on Leclerc. So a Ferrari front row lockout.
Which is not what we expected at all.
No, after what we'd saw earlier in the weekend, we really thought Mercedes would take it. And then Bottas pips Hamilton, not by a whole lot, just by a smidge. And Verstappen and Albon do the exact same time, but Verstappen gets to qualify ahead of him because he finished his lap sooner.
I just don't get that still.
It's just, if you do your lap sooner, that's the one that stands, and that's always been the way. Down to 3 decimal places, they did the exact same time. Sainz and Norris, again, Sainz did some cracking laps through quali, and Norris actually was right up there as well. Then Gasly and Grosjean we should speak about. Magnussen, we mentioned, crashed out.
You keep saying that he's fast on his day, and this shows that.
He's good in quali, and the Haas has some good one-lap pace, but shocking race pace. And I'm sure when we get into the race, that will bear out.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting quali. Did you find, Oscar, the tone of it was different because it was on the Sunday morning?
Well, I honestly didn't find that. It felt like a Saturday qualifying to me.
Felt pretty
Saturday
normal to
morning
you?
Qualifying. Oh, not Saturday morning for them. Saturday midday qualifying.
Yeah, you're right. The commentators were kind of saying, it felt a bit different. But I think you're right.
I guess
you'd
have to be there.
Maybe to be there. But yeah, it felt good to me. And it was kind of interesting to go from quali in the morning to race in the afternoon. Arguably, maybe one less practice, FP1, FP2 on Saturday, quali race Sunday. But I guess they want the Friday because they want people there.
And something sort of unrelated, because it's in Japan and that's near Australia time where we used to live, and those time zones are normally always in like the middle of the night. And whenever we have to record F1, and I have to shake you out of bed every morning. Unless it's live, I have to shake you out of bed.
It's Sunday morning. I love watching the F1, but it's it is Sunday morning, to be fair. So let's talk about the race. what did we keep hearing? No one's ever run the race on the second row of the grid.
Yeah.
We've got a Ferrari 1-2 lockout. Ferrari, of course, actually, Hamilton won the last race, didn't he? After Sebastian's failure.
Someone's won the race from the 9th row in the grid. Remember when Raikkonen did that?
Yeah, that's right. That classic race, 2005, but not from the second row, apparently. So it was a really interesting start because we saw this interesting event from Sebastian Vettel.
Well, he just jumped ahead a tiny bit, and apparently not even enough to get a penalty for it.
Yeah,
he didn't
trigger
trigger the sensor.
That's
they
right.
Said.
Yeah, so he jumps
got a
ahead.
really slow start anyway.
Yeah, it certainly hurt him because he jumps ahead. Obviously, the lights were red for a long time before they went out. Not
just
inordinately long,
a
little bit longer. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. This was a longer one. And yeah, Vettel obviously tried to preempt just a little bit, let out the clutch a little bit, jumped forward, but then came to a stop again. And then the lights went out and people are starting.
Yeah.
And so he kind of gets bogged down. Bottas, who's right behind him in P3, we should say, just zooms around him. Hamilton had an okay start.
And Leclerc had a terrible start.
Pretty ordinary start. So Hamilton kind of gets stuck behind Leclerc a little bit.
And Bottas in the lead.
And in fact, Sainz almost gets Hamilton, right?
Yeah, we watched that.
Yeah.
Hamilton's on board. Yeah, Sainz just came and zoomed around the third corner.
So Bottas gets past Vettel. Vettel sticks in behind Bottas. And then Hamilton kind of gets blocked a little bit. And then a hard-charging Max Verstappen into turn one tries to go around Chuck Leclerc, as Will Buxton called him.
Chuck Leclerc just careers straight into...
Yeah, look, clearly you're going to understand. We saw this time and time again where people try to make a move into turn one, and as soon as that car in front of them pulls in front, they wash out wide with understeer. And yeah, Charles was just being a little bit too ambitious. Max left him plenty of room, no doubt. But Charles didn't back out early enough and just plows into the side of the Red Bull. Does quite a bit of damage to the Red Bull, which would later retire, of course.
Yeah.
Pits after this, but effectively has no performance and retires.
I think they just got rid of too much of the floor.
Yeah, unfortunate because I think Max would have spiced up the race a bit because we know he's fast around Suzuka. And then we see a pretty interesting turn of events. So Bottas is charging down the road. Vettel's in behind him. Frankly, Bottas dominates the race more or less, right?
Yeah.
And has good race pace, starts to pull away from Vettel. Vettel losing that position at the front pretty much signs his doom in terms of winning the race. But we see then Leclerc continuing with his front end plate, which is the kind of end part of your front wing, hanging off, sparking like crazy.
And then later on in the straight,
his wing mirror's vibrating and he's holding it literally with his hand down the straight.
Wait, he is? I didn't see that.
And of course, Hamilton's right in behind him. And I thought with all that damage, he's just going to have understeer every corner and Hamilton's going to overtake him.
But nope.
Yeah, and so what happens is the FIA are kind of on the horn to Ferrari saying, pull your boy in. And they say, we've asked, we're going to pull him in. But then they tell him to stay out.
Which
and this is
he
important.
Does.
Yeah, and so he stays out. And eventually we see, just before 130R or after 130R, the back kind of straight area?
Sort of before that, yeah.
Yeah, we see that end plate fly off his car and collect Hamilton's right-hand wing mirror,
which
and
was
just
very
demolish
close
it.
to his face.
Yeah, which is dangerous, right? And in fact, this apparently then blocks Lando Norris's brake ducts, which causes a fire when he pits later on in his brake duct. Yeah, so apparently he gets debris in his brake duct. And so then, of course, Charles is like, well, I'm good now because I've lost that part of my front wing and I'm fine.
You meant Carlos Sainz, but I'm just going to say, Norris had a little crash, a big crash at the beginning too. Remember?
Tell me more.
I think it was Hamilton. I think Hamilton goes into the side of him and
he gets a fair bit of damage, doesn't he?
Damage. He kind of drops to last because he has to pit.
That's right. You're right. There was damage to Lando's car. I thought it was Lando's car that got the brake duct, and that's why he was pitting because of that damage to that. But his brake duct when he came into the pit was on fire.
Yeah.
And that it was on fire because of the blockage by the debris from Charles's car. So, yeah, all of this compounds. Eventually, they do pull in Charles, change his front wing, give him some fresh tyres, and this shapes up to your typical, front-running super fast car on fresh tyres charging through the grid, which is fun to watch. Maybe speaks to what a reverse grid race might look like.
At the end, like how it was like voting driver of the day or something, and it was Charles was the second one, and then some guy I read it was like people vote Leclerc on the driver of the day because of his amazing overtakes, but forget why he has to do them in the first place.
Yeah. A, he's kind of stuffed up, and B, he's in a much faster car. So yeah, it's good to watch. But hardly impressive. Let's go back a little bit further in the field. So that's what happens at the front at the beginning of the race. Then we settle into what's kind of a two-stop strategy. All these guys running on soft tyres, a tyre they qualified in Q2 on, and it's looking like most of them are probably going to do a two-stop. So soft to either soft again or medium and then soft at the end. Or vice versa. And off they go. Bottas is kind of pulling away. Looks like he's got great race pace. Vettel's probably not going to bother him. Yeah. Hamilton, though, is keeping up with Vettel. And that's where it's going to get juicy. Sainz, we should mention, is in a great P4.
Yeah,
after all this,
basically stays there for most of the race.
Yeah, and has good pace, really good pace. So Sainz doing again an outstanding job, you got to say, in the McLaren.
And meanwhile, Ricciardo's completely charging through the grid. While Hülkenberg did get a great start, Ricciardo just started charging it later on in it because he stayed on the mediums for a very long time. And Renault has done that many times before and failed with it miserably, notably Bahrain.
Sometimes hard to watch, right? They just keep him out.
But they kept him out, and then as soon as he started really losing time, I think it was to Sainz. I think it was because Sainz had pit.
Well, it was the guys behind him, right? More than anything. He was never going to catch Sainz. Sainz was already in front of him.
Sainz had pit and was catching up to him massively, and then they pit him.
Yeah, that's right. And he wasn't racing Sainz. It was all the guys in behind. As you say, Ricciardo started 15th, 16th. We said
16th.
Yeah. Was there a grid penalty or something? He started 15th? But around there, right? So he started around there, as did Hülkenberg. They started together. Hülkenberg gets a flyer of a start, ends up P10 in lap 1.
Yeah.
And so there's all these guys, though, that have started on the soft tyre because they made it through to Q2. Ricciardo started on the mediums. And so all of these guys initially get away, but Ricciardo pretty quickly on the medium tyres starts to slice through the field.
Yeah.
And it's interesting until he's basically catching up to this train of guys on the soft tyres. They, of course, all pit. And as you say, they kept Ricciardo out. He ran the longest first stint and the longest medium stint of anyone. And I heard even he, after the race, said, I was kind of doubting my guys in the garage because my pace was really starting to fall away. And he was like 3 seconds a lap slower or something. But they said, no, stick with the plan. You're going to be good on the softs, 1 or 2 more laps on the mediums. And of course, that's what happens. They pit him for the softs. He then comes out behind all these guys, a good 10 seconds behind the guys that he's now
closing
racing.
The gap massively.
And there's a tight train, right? Who'd you have in that train? Gasly, Stroll, Hülkenberg, Perez?
One of the racing points?
Yeah, Perez and Stroll.
Look at the results. Well, it was Perez, I think.
And it was Stroll and Perez.
Stroll caught up later.
Stroll was amongst it. Perez caught up later. Perez caught up later. Yeah. And actually, Stroll was up there. It was kind of Gasly, Stroll, Hülkenberg, and kind of Perez. And they were all in the mix for kind of the whole race, those guys. They were all racing each other. Yeah. I think the Hasses were in there, but then faded away. And
Ricciardo basically comes in and is like, everyone back off, and overtakes everyone.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Ferrari's kind of slicing its way through. Charles Leclerc's slicing its way through.
Yeah.
And so that's all going on at the front. But again, what we see is Sebastian Vettel pits quite early. And interestingly, comes from the soft and pits to the soft, basically signalling to stop.
Well, not basically, like he's just signaling.
So he's basically giving the game away.
Because you have to go on 2 different tires.
You got to run, 2 compounds, right?
Yeah, you can't just be like soft for the whole race.
So he goes to the soft. So it's obvious he's now on a 2-stopper. And it's interesting because Hamilton, by this stage, is feeling like he's a bit stuffed over, right? His tyres have worn out a little bit.
They put him on like a one-stopper. He's like, I'm going to have to do two stops.
Well, they kept him out long on the softs. So Bottas kind of comes in, covers off Seb, and they keep Hamilton out. And now he's leading the race. Bottas behind him and Vettel behind him.
Pretty quickly.
Bottas is eating time out of him. But they then, everyone's doing a two-stopper. So when they come in again, they've put Lewis onto the medium and Bottas on the medium, and Vettel's then on the soft, and then they all stop again. And it's interesting the way it plays out because, of course, Hamilton hasn't stopped, but Bottas has stopped, and they're like, well, Lewis is on the medium. Is he going to come in for his second stop, or is he going to try to run really deep? And
if we're building up suspense, the answer of the question is he tries to run deep.
Well, no, they pull him in. They pull him in for the pit. He kind of questioned it. He's like, well, maybe I could try to run to the end. And they're like, no, you'll never be able to do that. So they pull him in. That frees Bottas, who frankly is running a faultless race, good race pace, and is catching Lewis, really, really quickly, and probably would have had to overtaken him on track. But then we see Lewis now catching Sebastian and doing that quite quickly as well, because Seb, through all of the pits, Seb is always on kind of older tyres. He's always pitting a bit earlier, particularly than Lewis. So Lewis is hunting Seb down now and getting pretty close to him right at the end.
Yeah, they end up finishing like 0.5 of a second away from each other.
That's right. Meanwhile, through all of this, as you say, Ricciardo has finally cut his way all through the field.
And is now like a good 10 seconds ahead of everyone else, that whole train. Yeah,
except Sainz. So Sainz is ahead of him. But he's done a really good job to cut himself all the way through the field. Lando's kind of never really recovered. And as we get to the end of the race, it's pretty interesting. Bottas takes a really well-deserved victory. And interestingly, right at the end, some interesting things happen. So Lewis Hamilton's got purple lap, which means fastest lap. This is critical because if he comes third, Bottas comes first, and Vettel's in second. And I think at this time, old Charles Leclerc's running P6 or P... Did he get in front of Sainz?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. And so without that fastest lap, they're not going to win the Constructors. At this race, they wouldn't have won the Constructors.
No, just something I would have said. He did not get in front of Sainz. Just correct.
No, he didn't, did he? Yeah. And so then Charles decides... Charles is miles ahead of Ricciardo at this point.
Well, I'll pit and, tries to get started.
Bolt on some fresh softs.
But doesn't, and wouldn't have anyway, because they waved the flag a lap early.
Yeah, and so the end's got a bit of interest to it. Leclerc's miles in front of Ricciardo, and he's under investigation for that first lap incident. And we should talk about that, because when that first happens, a few laps later, the stewards, it comes up on screen, no further action. And
then a few laps later, it's comes up on screen, investigation.
Yeah, and then it comes up later, will be decided after the race, right?
Yeah.
And of course, so he's got this potential penalty, which we know turned into a penalty, hanging over his head, yet they still decide to pit him to go for fastest lap, which puts him in within kind of 5 to 10 seconds of Ricciardo.
But what happened was kind of interesting. So he got the 5-second penalty, which for that collision.
But not while the race was on, right?
But they probably expected that. But what they didn't expect probably was the 10-second penalty they got while driving around with that crazy front wing of theirs.
Do you think they didn't expect it? The FIA had said, bring your boy in. They said, yeah, we're going to on lap 3. And then they said, stay out. I mean, they defied effectively the FIA.
Well, I think we know from past experiences that the Ferrari strategists aren't the smartest of the bunch. But
they do have their moments, that's for sure. So at any rate, what we see is this interesting end where Charles has pitted, gone for fastest lap. And then, with a lap to go, or the last lap, a hard-charging Checo Perez, who's by this stage caught up to Gasly, is trying to overtake Gasly.
And then spins in.
And then overcooks it in turn 1, which is where everyone overcooks it because it's easy to do.
And then just spins into a wall.
Yellow flags come up.
But you know what? It's fine because the race had ended.
So there was a technical glitch, or we don't know what, but on some of the electronic signboards, the checkered flag went up on lap 52 instead of lap 53. which is a lap early. What this means is there's a rule that says if the checkered flag is shown, that's when the race has ended.
But they kind of kept going anyway because I
The
don't
cars
think the drivers
kept going.
realized.
Yeah, most of the drivers wouldn't have seen it, and probably with their data, they know there's a lap to go.
Yeah.
The problem is the rule is like that because if one driver sees on a board checkered flag, he might back off and someone overtakes him, and he's like, "But there was a checkered flag." So it's an understandable rule. This has a bit of an impact on the race. Checo, who's crashed on the last lap,
Didn't crash at all.
is suddenly classified
Ninth.
P9. Fortunately, he didn't get Gasly. Leclerc, mind you, now takes these penalties and was that close to Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo, who finished, frankly, a fantastic P7,
finished
gets
sixth.
promoted to P6.
Yeah.
Carlos Sainz, beautiful race in P5. We haven't talked about Alexander Albon. Great race.
Yeah.
P4, really good race pace. Battled a bit with Sainz, came at him, did some great overtakes. You know, probably his best race since being at Albon.
Well, all
at
of
Red
his
Bull.
other races have been penalised or somehow he started in last.
Yeah, but this was a nice, clean race. He qualified on the same time as Max Verstappen. You got to say a great weekend for him. Sainz, great weekend. Ricciardo, great weekend. Leclerc gets demoted to P7. But because of this early flag shenanigans, Gasly P8, Perez P9, Hulkenberg P10. I think Perez had crashed.
Yes.
Hulkenberg, did he get Gasly on the last lap?
I think he did.
Would Hulkenberg have been P8? I think he was. I think it was a 6 and an 8.
Has it been decided what they're going to do on that subject?
Well, that's all done and dusted. However, so there's your race. We should finish it off. Stroll, by the way, Stroll, who was in the points, knocked out of the points because of that. So he'll be
Racing
angry.
Point don't care because they got an extra point for that.
Well,
like,
because
by
of Perez,
knocking them out
yeah,
of
but
the points, he would have come 10th, which is 1 point, but then Perez got 2 points. So
But
Racing Point don't care.
But Stroll does because he's like, well, Perez, you crashed and I got a point, but because of that, you get points and I don't get points.
Again, Racing Point probably don't care.
So, I mean, Stroll, who's pretty whingy at the best of times, would be whinging about that one for sure.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the field is as it is. Kvyat recovered the 12th. Norris, because of that earlier damage you mentioned, 13th. Raikkonen, pretty nothing race. But he did beat Giovinazzi, actually. I wonder how that panned out. I didn't notice a lot of that. Grosjean, of course, P15. And then Russell kind of rounds it up. Magnussen and Russell at the end. And Kubica, who had horrendous pace. And there's something going on there, but I'm not sure the politics of that. So we won't talk about it. However, Oscar.
Yes.
So after the race, penalties, fine.
Yeah.
But after the race...
Mr. Not Otmar Zafner, whatever the new guy's name is, at Racing Point, decided to file a 12-page, I don't know what to call it.
Dossier,
that's the word, the French word that nobody knows except for you. About how Renault is cheating.
That's right. So apparently it's an automatic brake bias. So they're claiming that Renault have some system which automatically modifies the brake bias based on where they are in the lap. This is illegal. The drivers have to do that themselves.
Yeah.
So this could be far-reaching if true. Renault have basically come out and said we're going to defend it vigorously. So this will go on for a little while. If true, it could disqualify them from Suzuka
and other races,
or potentially other races. So it could have a big impact. Would be really devastating. It's not like Renault have ever cheated. But
wait, if you don't know about Renault cheating, I'm not going to explain it, but just search Crashgate on the web. Anyway.
So this could have far-reaching consequences, and it would be really disappointing if that's the case, particularly off
and
this great race.
Some people were comparing it to another thing called Spygate, which again, look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Old stuff. So anyway, the post-race shenanigans could continue. Overall, a kind of interesting weekend. Some good racing on track. It's a good race
I
too.
enjoyed it. It was better than Australia.
Some good
that's
overtaking.
The one to compare races to now.
I mean, having Leclerc cut through the field was great. Ricciardo going through the field was great. So we got to see some good racing at the front again. We saw this kind of Bottas,
just to touch
Vettel,
on that comment
Hamilton
about
thing.
Albon, I just saw an article on F1 saying Albon says definitely my best race in Red Bull.
There you go. Yeah, I thought it was a really as you say, he hasn't had a a really clean weekend yet between
Yeah.
penalties and other incidents. We saw him crash a few times, of course. So, yeah, a few different things
Yeah.
going on. So, yeah, overall, a good weekend in Suzuka.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it.
And, of course, Mercedes wrapped up the World Constructors. Coming into Mexico, what we'll see is the potential for Lewis. We should say only Lewis or Valtteri can now win the drivers.
And unless Lewis DNFs in every race and Bottas probably wins every race, that's probably the only
it's not
scenario
quite
where-
as severe as that, but yeah, it would be pretty exceptional for Bottas
I'd
to win.
love it if he won it, but
Yeah.
I mean...
And by the way, kudos to Valtteri Bottas for a great weekend. He was pretty much faster than Lewis all weekend.
So-
out-qualified him, out-raced him.
Yeah.
Great weekend by Valtteri.
So, Mexico, what can we expect? Well, I doubt you remember much of the Mexico circuit, but I play the F1 game, so I know what it's like, and I probably would expect Ferrari, because they have that super long start-finish straight.
What
so I
about
would
the-
expect Ferrari and Renault to be pretty dominant, because Renault always have that good engine.
They do have good top-end speed. What about the Red Bulls, though? Remember last year when we thought Max Verstappen was going to win his maiden pole and Ricciardo pipped him?
Yeah.
But then in the race, Ricciardo, I think, broke down. And Max Verstappen won that race, right?
Yeah, he got overtaken twice on the start. He ended up in third before the first corner.
So maybe the Red Bulls are going to be strong. They had pole and the victory last
I don't know
year.
how they did that, though. So, like,
There's some
looking
pretty
at their
tight,
performance
low,
now.
high downforce parts of that circuit.
Yeah, there's like this last section where it's like no braking but really fast. That's pretty hard to get right. You would need good downforce for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, the Ferraris are looking good at these circuits. They're not supposed to. I think their upgrades worked. Mercedes brought some upgrades to Suzuka that seem to have done them well.
So it's like Mercedes is the new Ferrari and Ferrari is the new Mercedes.
What I would say is where we've traditionally said, Red Bull should be strong, they kind of haven't. Red Bull have really tapered a bit towards the end of the season where it feels like Mercedes and particularly Ferrari have really developed.
Red Bull have taken a sort of weird road where they weren't very strong at the beginning. I was like, that Honda engine's trash. During the middle, they were really strong, and now they're kind of less again.
Yeah, and obviously the Hondas were all fresh and turned up for Suzuka being the the home Grand Prix
Honda
and all that
didn't
kind
do
of thing.
too well,
Yeah.
but,
So
Max Verstappen retired on the first lap.
So Mexico's 2 weeks away?
2 weeks. Is it 1 week?
25th to 27th. No, it's 2 weeks away. And then there's a week gap to the COTA Circuit of the Americas,
where we are going to
which
be.
we will be attending. So yeah, that should be a good one.
And F1's in Hollywood. If any of you are going to that'd be
Yeah, there's some kind of LA kind of F1 fan event that's going on. So check that out if you're in the region.
Yep.
Oscar, I think that's about us done.
Yep.
Usual
Email
call
us.
outs.
Yeah, email us Formula One and Sun with 1 as the number, not the
Formula number 1 and A&D Sun at gmail.com. And we're on
Reddit, Twitter.
At Formula One and Sun on Twitter if you want to reach out.
We'll probably get other social media, but not that important.
No, they're the main ones. And, feel free to rate us on iTunes or whatever it is that you use.
Feel very free to rate us on iTunes.
Only if it's good. Otherwise, you can rate us anyway. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll catch you next time on Formula One and...
Soon.